You are told that successful people have specific morning routines, habits, and disciplines that created their wealth. What if I told you that copying rich people's behaviors without their advantages is the most expensive form of cosplay ever invented? This sounds logical because we see billionaires waking up at 5 a.m. and assume their daily routines cause their success. But there's something that doesn't quite add up when you adopt every habit from successful people and remain unsuccessful yourself. Most self-improvement content focuses on the daily routines and mindsets of wealthy individuals. Why do people who perfectly replicate billionaire morning routines still struggle to pay their bills? Success habits appear valuable because disciplined people seem to achieve better outcomes than undisciplined people. But what if the entire habit copying framework is designed to keep you focused on behaviors while ignoring the systems that actually create wealth? Think about the last expensive course you bought about morning routines or productivity systems. Did implementing those habits change your bank account or just your daily schedule? The success addiction operates by convincing you that wealthy people's behaviors cause their wealth while hiding the fact that their wealth enables behaviors that would be impossible or counterproductive for people without money. This explains why people spend thousands of dollars on coaching programs that teach billionaire habits but never address billionaire advantages. If you want to understand why copying successful behaviors without successful circumstances keeps you busy but not wealthy, subscribe to Prof. Jung Explained and share this video with someone who has tried multiple morning routines this year. They need to see why their dedication to self-improvement might be preventing them from understanding how wealth actually works. The system creates fundamentally different relationships between habits and outcomes depending on your economic starting point. When we say successful habits, we mean totally different things based on whether you have wealth to protect or wealth to build. For people with existing wealth, successful habits mean maintaining systems that preserve and grow assets they already own. Wake up early to review investment portfolios, exercise to maintain health that supports long-term planning, read to stay informed about opportunities that require capital to pursue. For people without wealth, successful habits mean optimizing personal productivity within employment systems that capture most of the value they create. Wake up early to fit more work into the day, exercise to maintain energy for longer hours, read to develop skills that might increase salary slightly. Think about the difference between waking up at 5 a.m. to check your stock portfolio versus waking up at 5 a.m. to commute to a job that pays hourly wages. Same habit, completely different economic context. This explains something curious about productivity advice, targeting different economic groups. Wealthy people receive advice about asset management, strategic thinking, and delegation. Working people receive advice about time management, personal optimization, and efficiency improvement. The difference isn't just about information access. It creates fundamentally different relationships between effort and reward. Wealthy people optimize systems that multiply their advantages. Working people optimize themselves to serve systems that extract their value. But here's where it gets interesting. The success addiction doesn't just waste your time copying irrelevant habits. It actually prevents you from developing the thinking patterns that might improve your actual circumstances. People without wealth develop what psychologists call behavioral mimicry fixation. They become obsessed with replicating successful people's visible behaviors while ignoring the invisible advantages that make those behaviors effective or even possible. This creates enormous frustration because you're following exact protocols from successful people but experiencing completely different results, leading to self-blame rather than system analysis. Meanwhile, people with wealth understand that their habits support advantages they already possess, rather than creating advantages they don't have. They can afford to experiment with different approaches because their financial security doesn't depend on personal optimization. Consider how this affects your relationship with risk and experimentation. People copying successful habits often become rigid about following exact protocols because they believe precision and execution will eventually produce similar results. But successful people typically develop their habits through trial and error while having financial cushions that allow them to experiment safely with different approaches to productivity and lifestyle design. The success addiction becomes even more sophisticated when we examine how it handles skill development and learning priorities. People without wealth are encouraged to focus on personal development that makes them more valuable employees or service providers. This personal improvement keeps them focused on becoming better versions of themselves within existing economic structures, rather than questioning whether those structures serve their long-term interests. The habit copying approach assumes that success comes from individual optimization rather than systemic advantages, leading people to invest time and energy in changing themselves rather than changing their relationship to systems that determine outcomes. Do you find yourself constantly trying new productivity systems instead of questioning why your increased productivity doesn't increase your wealth proportionally? The success addiction also exploits what economists call context collapse in behavior analysis. People observe successful habits without understanding the economic context that makes those habits practical or beneficial. A billionaire's morning routine might include meditation, exercise, and strategic reading because they have personal assistants handling operational tasks, investment managers handling financial decisions, and automated systems generating passive income. Copying that routine without those support systems often means neglecting necessary survival activities like job searching, bill management, or skill development that might actually improve your economic position. The success addiction also creates what we might call discipline worship that misses the relationship between self-control and external circumstances. People without wealth are taught that developing more discipline will eventually lead to wealth accumulation. But discipline becomes much easier when you have money to solve problems that create stress and decision fatigue for people operating without financial buffers or safety nets. Wealthy people often appear disciplined because they have resources to structure their environment in ways that make good choices easier and bad choices less accessible or necessary. The success addiction perpetuates itself through what we might call survivorship bias in habit analysis. People study the routines of visible successful individuals while ignoring the millions of people who follow similar habits without achieving similar outcomes. This selective observation makes successful habits seem like reliable cause and effect relationships rather than correlations that might work differently depending on starting circumstances and available resources. The emphasis on individual habits also obscures the role of timing, luck, inherited advantages, and systemic factors that contribute to success but can't be replicated through behavior modification. Consider how differently habit formation might work if you understood that successful people often develop their routines after achieving wealth rather than before, making their habits results of success rather than causes. The success addiction also handles failure and setbacks in ways that reinforce individual blame rather than system analysis. When people copy successful habits but don't achieve successful outcomes, they typically conclude they need more discipline or better execution. This self-criticism prevents them from questioning whether their energy might be better invested in understanding how wealth actually accumulates, rather than how wealthy people manage their daily schedules. When wealthy people experience setbacks, they typically have resources and support systems that allow them to maintain their routines while addressing problems through financial or social capital, rather than personal optimization. The success addiction also exploits what psychologists call attribution errors in success analysis. People assume that successful individuals achieved wealth through personal behaviors rather than systemic advantages or favorable circumstances. This attribution error leads to extensive focus on replicating behaviors while ignoring the economic, social, and historical factors that actually enable those individuals to benefit from their habits. The behavior-focused approach also prevents people from developing strategic thinking about wealth building, resource allocation, and system design that might be more relevant to their actual circumstances than morning routine optimization. But there's something even more sophisticated happening here. The success addiction doesn't just keep you focused on irrelevant behaviors. It actually programs you to admire and defend systems that extract value from your increased productivity without proportional compensation. People who adopt successful habits often develop pride in their discipline and optimization while accepting that their improved performance primarily benefits employers, clients, or business owners rather than improving their own financial position substantially. This productivity pride makes personal optimization feel virtuous, even when it serves other people's wealth building more effectively than your own, creating psychological satisfaction that substitutes for actual economic improvement. The success addiction also creates what economists call effort displacement in wealth building strategy. People spend considerable time and mental energy perfecting daily routines while avoiding or delaying activities that might actually increase their control over productive assets. The hours invested in morning routine optimization, productivity system refinement, and habit tracking could potentially be directed toward learning about investment, business development, or other wealth-building strategies that address systemic rather than personal factors. This time allocation reflects the success addiction's effectiveness at redirecting ambitious energy toward individual improvement rather than system engagement or advantage building. The success addiction works because it tells people what they want to hear, that their individual effort and discipline can overcome any systemic disadvantage through proper behavior optimization and personal development. But wealthy people understand a different relationship between habits and wealth, that sustainable financial success typically comes from systemic advantages that make good habits easier to maintain rather than from good habits that create systemic advantages. The system perpetuates itself because people who succeed through habit optimization typically had underlying advantages that enabled their personal development to translate into wealth building, while people who struggle despite excellent habits blame their execution rather than questioning the framework. Meanwhile, the actual evidence shows that wealth concentration increases over time, regardless of how many people adopt successful daily routines, suggesting that individual optimization has minimal impact on systemic wealth distribution patterns. The success addiction also creates what we might call coaching industry dependency. People become convinced that they need expert guidance to properly implement successful habits, rather than developing independent analysis of their economic circumstances and strategic options. This expert dependency generates revenue for coaching programs that teach behavioral optimization while avoiding discussion of structural factors that might be more relevant to actual wealth building than personal routine refinement. And perhaps the most insidious aspect of the success addiction is how it handles the relationship between effort and entitlement. People who work hard on personal development often feel entitled to success while remaining unaware of systemic factors that influence outcomes regardless of individual optimization. This effort-based entitlement can lead to frustration and blame when personal development doesn't translate into wealth, preventing people from developing more effective strategies for navigating economic systems that operate by different rules than personal improvement. The success addiction has successfully converted people's natural desire for improvement into a mechanism that keeps them focused on optimizing themselves for systems that capture most of the value they create, rather than questioning whether those systems serve their interests. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the success addiction is how it prevents people from developing systemic thinking and strategic analysis that might actually improve their circumstances, rather than just improving their daily routines within circumstances that remain fundamentally unchanged. Time spent perfecting morning routines is time not spent understanding how wealth accumulates through ownership, investment, and system design rather than through personal optimization and behavioral discipline. The success addiction also creates what psychologists call performance theater around productivity and lifestyle optimization. People develop elaborate routines that signal discipline and ambition while producing minimal actual improvement in their economic circumstances. This performance aspect makes habit adoption feel meaningful and progressive, even when the habits don't address the systemic factors that determine wealth accumulation and financial security over time. The signaling value of successful habits often becomes more important than their practical results, creating social validation that substitutes for economic progress and keeps people invested in optimization rather than strategy. Business owners and investors typically focus on systems and results rather than personal routines because they understand that wealth comes from controlling productive assets rather than optimize personal behaviors within systems. Others control. The success addiction also exploits what behavioral economists call temporal discounting in habit formation. People focus on immediate feeling of accomplishment from completing morning routines rather than long-term wealth-building strategies that might require different types of effort and patience. This immediate gratification from habit completion can actually prevent people from engaging in less immediately satisfying activities like learning about finance, developing business skills, or building networks that might have greater long-term impact on their economic position. The daily satisfaction of checking off completed habits creates a productivity dopamine cycle that makes people feel successful while keeping them trapped in optimization activities that don't address structural barriers to wealth accumulation. Consider how this affects your relationship with delayed gratification and long-term planning. People obsessed with daily habit optimization often struggle to maintain focus on activities that don't provide immediate feedback or visible progress markers. But wealth building typically requires sustained attention to less immediately satisfying activities like market research, relationship building, or skill development that might take months or years to produce visible results. The success addiction also handles goal setting in ways that favor process optimization over outcome achievement. People become more focused on maintaining consistent routines than on questioning whether those routines are actually moving them toward their stated financial or life goals. This process fixation can prevent people from adjusting their strategies when evidence suggests their current approach isn't producing desired results, leading to years of consistent effort in directions that don't improve their actual circumstances. Successful people often maintain flexibility in their methods while staying focused on results, understanding that habits should serve goals rather than becoming goals themselves through optimization, obsession. The success addiction perpetuates itself through what we might call complexity bias in personal development. People often prefer elaborate multi-step routines that require significant mental energy rather than simple strategies that might be more effective but less personally demanding. This complexity preference makes personal development feel important and sophisticated, while avoiding direct engagement with simpler but potentially more challenging activities like saving money, reducing expenses, or developing income-generating skills. The elaborate routine preference also creates dependency on personal development content and coaching that provides increasingly complex optimization strategies rather than addressing basic wealth building principles that might be more practical but less marketable. But there's something even more sophisticated happening here. The success addiction doesn't just waste time on irrelevant optimization. It actually prevents people from developing the analytical skills necessary to evaluate whether their efforts are producing proportional results. People focused on habit optimization often lose the ability to step back and assess whether their overall strategy is working because they become too invested in the process to objectively evaluate outcomes. This analytical blindness keeps people committed to approaches that aren't serving their interests while making them resistant to feedback or alternative strategies that might be more effective but less personally validating. The success addiction also exploits what economists call sunk cost fallacy in personal development investment. People who have spent significant time and money on habit optimization become reluctant to abandon those approaches even when evidence suggests they aren't producing desired results. This investment protection mindset keeps people committed to optimization strategies that provide psychological satisfaction rather than economic improvement, preventing them from redirecting their energy toward more effective approaches. The time and money already invested in morning routines, productivity systems, and habit tracking makes people feel obligated to continue those approaches rather than questioning whether different strategies might serve their interests better. The success addiction also creates what we might call authority dependency in lifestyle design. People become convinced that successful individuals have discovered optimal approaches to daily routine management rather than understanding that successful approaches vary significantly based on individual circumstances and resources. This authority worship prevents people from developing independent judgment about what might work for their specific situation, leading to endless cycles of trying different expert-recommended systems rather than experimenting with approaches based on their own analysis and constraints. The expert dependency also generates ongoing revenue for coaches and content creators who provide increasingly sophisticated optimization strategies while avoiding discussion of whether personal optimization is the most effective use of ambitious energy. The success addiction works because it provides immediate psychological rewards through completion, satisfaction, and social validation, while avoiding the uncertainty and delayed gratification required for strategies that might actually improve people's economic circumstances. The system perpetuates itself because people who succeed, despite focusing on habit optimization, typically had underlying advantages that enable their personal development to translate into wealth, while people who struggle blame their execution rather than questioning whether they're optimizing for the wrong outcomes. Meanwhile, the actual evidence suggests that wealth accumulation correlates more strongly with systemic factors like inheritance, education access, geographic location, and economic timing than with personal habit optimization or productivity system sophistication. And perhaps the most insidious aspect of the success addiction is how it converts people's natural desire for improvement into a mechanism that keeps them focused on serving systems that extract value from their increased productivity rather than building systems that serve their own wealth accumulation. The success addiction represents one of the most effective methods for redirecting ambitious energy toward individual optimization rather than strategic thinking about how to build genuine financial security and independence. Time spent perfecting morning routines is time not spent understanding how wealth accumulates through ownership, investment, and system design, rather than through personal optimization and behavioral discipline. If you want more analysis of how success programming serves coaching industry profits rather than student outcomes, subscribe to Prof. Jiang Explained and share this with someone who tracks their habits daily but hasn't tracked their net worth growth. They need to understand why their personal optimization might be serving other people's business models rather than their own wealth building.